The members of this 21st century Bedouin caravan, one of the few still operating in Mesopotamia, are probably unaware they're walking on land that, centuries ago, belonged to a great people, the Arameans. In the course of centuries, this ancient race has left an indelible mark on world history. Today, it is as if the memory of this people has been lost in the mists of time. In a land that has nurtured hundreds and hundreds of years of history in which the Aramean heritage has played no role. Nevertheless, enclaves of Arameans live on, a few still clinging to their roots in the Middle East, the majority dispersed in communities scattered all over the world, and all brought together by their church, the Syrian Orthodox Church, that has recorded their heritage and preserved their language. The term Aram appeared for the first time in the 23rd century BC to indicate a region of Upper Mesopotamia where this nomadic people had settled. The history of the Arameans, a Semitic people which traces its lineage to Aram, son of Shem, Noah's fourth son, has its roots in ancient texts, including the Old Testament and the Quran, a heritage confirmed by recent archaeological finds. The Bible tells of Abraham, the wandering Aramean, from Ur of the Chaldees in southern Iraq, who settled for a long time with his family in the region of Aram Naharaim, meaning the Aram of the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, specifically in Haran, in the southeast corner of modern Turkey. Later, when Abraham wanted for his son Isaac a wife who was not from the land of Canaan, where they had finally made their home, he sent his servant back to Haran. The servant found Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, son of Milcah, wife of Abraham's brother, and consequently the patriarch's great niece. When the servant first set eyes on her, she was fetching water at the well, a daily chore that continues today.
Tell me, my child, who is your father? Can your father give us shelter for the night?
I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah by Nachor. We have no lack of straw and hay, and our home is a roomy house to lodge in.
Later, when it came time for Isaac's son Jacob to marry, Isaac followed his father's example and gave his son this order.
Go to Padan Aram, the house of Bethuel, the father of your mother, and take from there your wife, from among the daughters of Laban, brother of your mother.
Jacob did as he was told, and found 3 shepherds minding their flocks near a well.
My brothers, where are you from?
We are from Haran.
Do you know Laban, son of Nachor?
We do.
Is he well?
Yes. Oh, that's his daughter Rachel approaching with the flock.
Jacob kissed Rachel, a shepherdess like those still found today near Haran, and told her they were related because he was Rebekah's son. Therefore, he was an Aramean, just like her family. Abraham the wandering Aramean brings us to 1850 BC, but it is only in around 1100 BC that the first explicit mention of the Arameans appears in the annals of the king of Assyria, Tiglath-Pileser I, in which are recorded battles against the Alamu Aramean nomads along the banks of the Euphrates. I forded the river Euphrates 28 times and followed the Aramean people from Beshre to Tadmor, from the city of Rafik in Babylonia to the city of Anat in the region of Suhi, and to Gargamish and to the east of the plains of Srug. It was here that Dura Europos was founded as a river port and defensive point against attacks from Mesopotamia. This ancient city, founded in the 4th century BC by Seleucus, Alexander the Great's lieutenant and head of the Seleucid dynasty, was for a long time not only an impregnable fortress that defended the kingdom of Syria, but also an important trade center on the caravan route that linked Mesopotamia to the Arabian Gulf and to Antioch, the ancient capital of Syria. Captured and razed to the ground by the Sassanids in 256 AD, the city, or what was left of it, was buried under the sand for 1,700 years. Today, Dura Europos is one of Syria's most important archaeological sites, a veritable trove for archaeological finds and a constant source of precious information that serves to reconstruct the history and the customs of people who, like the Arameans, inhabited this area even before the city existed. The citadel of Dura Europos overlooked the majestic Euphrates, along which the Arameans founded various city-states. Some are named in the Old Testament: Aram Soba, Aram Bit Rehob, Padan Aram, Aram Damascus. Others, such as Bit Adini, have been passed down from Assyrian sources. At the end of the 10th century BC, the Assyrian Empire started its expansion towards the west and gradually conquered the neighboring city-states that, until then, had maintained their independence. This is why documents regarding the Aramaean civilization are often found in Assyrian-Babylonian archaeological digs. In 1979, at Tel Fekeriye, just south of the Turkish-Syrian border, a great statue came to light. It is now in the Museum of Damascus and dates back to the 9th century BC, when it was erected by a certain Hadad Izi, a Syrian governor of Gozan for the Assyrians, king of Gozan for the Arameans, in honor of the god Hadad, lord of the water in the heavens and on the earth that brings richness, creates pastures, and irrigates all the land. On the tunic is a long inscription in the Assyrian dialect of Akkadian and in Aramaic. The Akkadian text is inscribed in the place of honor, the front, while the Aramaic text is relegated to the back. Hadad the storm god was one of the most important divinities worshipped by the Arameans. He is sometimes depicted brandishing thunderbolts, as on this stele in the Louvre in Paris. Hadad Izi of Gozan was not the only Aramean king to have left a relic that has come down to us intact. In the Museum of Aleppo, at the foot of a likeness of the god Melkart, an inscription attests to it being the statue that Bar-Hadad, king of Aram, erected out of gratitude to Melkart, his lord, who answered his prayer. A longer inscription, also at the Louvre, was inscribed by Zakir, the king of Hamath, in thanks for a victory over 16 other Aramean kings. The god who gave him that victory was Baal Shamayin, Baal, the lord of the heavens, who could be the same god as Hadad. The longest of the ancient Aramaic inscriptions preserved in the National Museum of Damascus is, however, a treatise between a certain Bargaya, perhaps a high official of the Assyrian king himself, and Matiel, the king of the Aramaean city-state of Arpad. In the text, Bargaya lists a series of curses against Matiel should the agreement ever be broken.
If Matiel is dishonest in the dealings, let his kingdom become a kingdom of sand, a kingdom of dreams that dies like a flame. Let Hadad hurl his wrath and all sorts of disasters on the earth and in the heavens. Let him send hail unto Arpad. Let the locusts go mad for 7 years. Let not a blade of grass grow, that one can see neither vegetation nor green pastures. Let not the sound of a lyre be heard in Arpad or among its inhabitants, but only moans of desperation, crying, and lamentations.
Aside from the inscriptions, there exists other proof of these Aramaean city-states, such as the stone sculptures unearthed at Gozan Tal Halaf, on view in the Museum of Aleppo. The delicately sculpted ivories from Hadatu Arslan Tash in the Museum of Aleppo and the Louvre. Fresco fragments from the mid-8th century, also in Aleppo. the frontispiece of the Temple of Hadad in the National Museum of Damascus. The Aramean city-states, whether independently or as a group, engaged in recurrent conflicts not only with the Assyrians but also with the Israelites. Like the Assyrians, the Israelites were defeated several times by the Arameans, who, in turn, were several times defeated by them. Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and Egypt are the countries that still today preserve the memory of the ancient Aramean civilization, often only in place names. First and foremost, the Aram Naharain, the Aram of the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Mesopotamia of today, the cradle of the Arameans. Then Padan Aram, the field or highway of Aram. Arpad, Bit Adini, Amku, Nisibin, Edessa, the valley of Orontes, the valley of the Al-Biqa, Koba Bet Rehot, the valley of the Litani, Hamath, Sam al-Gozan, Damascus, the sites in which the Arameans played a key role from the 11th to the 8th century BC. In an endless succession of wars among themselves and against outside enemies. Then, in 732 BC, the Arameans were finally defeated by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III. Damascus was destroyed. Its last king, Ratson II, was killed, and the territory was broken up into provinces that were annexed by Assyria.
Damascus will cease to be a city. It will become a collection of ruins. Its neighborhoods will be abandoned forever and will become grazing land.
I will set fire to the walls of Damascus, and it will devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad.
And the people of Aram will become slaves.
Thus, the biblical prophecies came true. From that moment onward, the dispersion of the Arameans began. Without a land of their own, they were condemned to wander over the course of time to the four quarters of the world. Nevertheless, in their own way, the Arameans actually conquered the world, not with arms and the might of their nation, but with a far more effective instrument, their language, that has survived through the centuries and has come down to us in the liturgy of the Syrian Orthodox Church and the other Syriac churches. The inscription on the famous 9th century BC statue of Hadad is the oldest surviving document of the Aramaic language, and evidence that in around 1000 BC, the Arameans adopted the Phoenician alphabet, composed of 22 letters. They used it without adding as much as one character, even though the phonetic system of the Aramaic language was much richer than Phoenician. Long before conquering the Aramean city-states, the Assyrians realized that it was much faster and more practical to write in Aramaic rather than Akkadian, the accepted language of the day. Akkadian contained an unwieldy number of characters compared to the 22 letters of the Phoenician Aramaic alphabet. In addition, Aramaic could be written with ink on skins or on papyrus, while the cuneiform Akkadian required a stylus which impressed the wedge-shaped characters onto soft clay tablets. Because of its simplicity and rapidity, Aramaic soon became an international language used in official documents, in diplomatic reports, and in commercial transactions. In the second book of Kings, the ministers of King Hezekiah, in order to avoid being understood by the people, ask the emissary of the king of Assyria, "Please speak to us in the Aramaic tongue, so that only we can understand you." 100 years later, a Philistine king wrote in Aramaic to the Pharaoh of Egypt, asking for military help to stem the advance of the Babylonian army. Paradoxically, after 732 BC, the year of the defeat of the last Aramaean kingdom, the language of the defeated people became a universal language. Easier to write than Akkadian, and with instruments that were easier to come by, it was a kind of shorthand compared to the complicated Akkadian that remained a language for scribes and scholars, while Aramaic became a popular language used by all social classes. Thus, in due course, Aramaic spread throughout a vast area from Asia Minor and Afghanistan to Egypt and North Africa, reaching as far as India and leaving many traces of its presence. In Jordan, the spectacular site of Wadi Musa, or the Valley of Moses, is a prelude to the fascination of Petra, the capital of the Nabateans, and another source of evidence of the Aramaean presence. We pass through the Sikh Gorge, following one of the many canals dug out of the rock as part of a complex irrigation system for which the Aramaean Nabateans became famous. It leads us directly to the Pink City, as Petra is called, in reference to the color of the sandstone from which, one might say, it is sculpted. Aramaic, written in a distinctive local script, was the language of the Nabateans who flourished from the 1st century BC to the 1st century AD. They carved their capital out of the living rock. In truth, Petra was a stronghold, located strategically on the main route between the north and south of the Arab Peninsula, traveled by caravans with precious loads of incense and myrrh from Arabia, spices and silks from India, ivory from Africa, and precious skins. From this well-protected, dominant position, it was easy to raise tolls, to demand exorbitant sums for food, shelter, and stabling, and to play a key role in the commerce between merchants and caravaneers. And of course, it was easy to plunder too. Thus, the Aramaean Nabateans became rich and powerful. Then, in 106 AD, the Romans incorporated the kingdom of Petra into the Roman Empire, making it the capital of the new province of Arabia. This led to the development of new caravan routes, slowly diverting trade away from Petra and causing its decline. The Nabateans' own dialect of Aramaic has survived in inscriptions on the pediments of buildings and temples, on rocks and stones, at the base of votive capitals, and on the walls of gullies. In the latter case, the writing is in the guise of implorations to the gods to avert disaster in the event of flash floods that would race through the gorges, sweeping away everything in their path. a garden of 500,000 palm trees, and the imposing vestiges of what was once a large Roman city in the middle of the desert are the most remarkable characteristics of Palmyra, the ancient Tadmor in the heart of Syria, another hub of the Aramaic linguistic area. As in Petra, traces of the Aramaic idiom that used to be spoken here can still be found. The extraordinary story of this city features, among others, Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, one of the greatest women of ancient times. Beautiful, noble, ambitious, a charismatic leader, and an indefatigable horsewoman, Zenobia addressed her people in Aramaic, wearing a helmet and purple robes. For a short period, the armies of Palmyra even managed to seize control of many of the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. This was in the day of the Emperor Aurelian, who eventually managed to capture Palmyra and take Queen Zenobia prisoner. Since very early times, the oasis was inhabited by the Arameans, and here people spoke Aramaic of Palmyra. Traces of that language can be seen on the Roman colonnade along the main road. Beneath the inscriptions in Greek are the same words in Aramaic.
قبورة دنه عبد بالحزاي بر بريكي بر بالحزاي.
Today, in the local museum, the voice of a scholar reading those Aramaic inscriptions as though they were current idiom gives the impression of being caught in a time warp.
لعلمة بيرح نيسان سنة
Hatra in Iraq was founded in the 1st century BC and was destroyed by the Persians early in the 3rd century AD. More than 300 Aramaic inscriptions have been found here, some in the Aramaic dialect of Hatra. Many are of great historical importance. Most of these inscriptions are now preserved in the Museum of Mosul and in Baghdad, together with statues and other relics found at the site. By the second half of the 5th century BC, Aramaic had become the most widespread language in Palestine, as everyday documents inscribed on pottery indicate. In 1947, at Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea, a Bedouin boy looking for a goat that had wandered off entered a cave untouched by time and stumbled upon what is probably the most important archaeological find ever made in the Holy Land: a terracotta jar containing the oldest group of scrolls ever discovered of biblical and non-biblical manuscripts. It was the first of a series of such scrolls that subsequently came to light in 11 caves, an unprecedented treasure that continues to fire the imagination and polarize the interest of scholars around the world. One of the first and best preserved of the scrolls contained the book of Isaiah, copied many centuries earlier than any other surviving manuscript of this book. The Isaiah scroll is written in Hebrew, but another one contains an Aramaic translation of the book of Job. From the Jordan to the Dead Sea, from Judea to Galilee to Samaria, from Syria to the Negev to Sinai, Aramaic was the language of the people, and therefore also the language of Jesus and the apostles. When he addressed the multitude in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spoke in Aramaic.
بريخين ايلين ادمسكين نون بروح الدلهوني ملكوث دشمايو بريخين نون ايلين دابلين دهينون نتبايون بريخين ايلين ادماكيخين دهينون نرثون لرعو.
After the death and resurrection of Jesus, the apostles and disciples who constituted the Church of Jerusalem went out into the world to spread the word of God, speaking the only language that they knew well, Aramaic.
So they left and preached everywhere, while the Lord went with them and confirmed the word with his great works.
Antioch, today Antakya, on the Orontes River, was the capital of the Roman province of Syria and the third most important city of the empire after Rome and Alexandria. No wonder that it was one of the first places visited by the messengers of the new religion. After consolidating his role as leader of the apostles, Peter lived there for a year with Paul and Barnabas, and together they gathered many converts. The inhabitants of Antioch were sometimes skeptical and often hostile. But here, the church accepted non-Jewish converts, and for the first time, its congregation became known as Christians. The echo of those days seems to permeate the air around the ancient church cave on the outskirts of the city, where it's believed that Peter preached when he was in Antioch with Paul. The Crusaders added the facade at a time when Antioch was an important Christian base in Syria, but the cave still looks as it did in its primitive state. Originally, it was owned by the evangelist Luke, a native of Antioch, who gave it to the Christians so that they could have their own place to meet and pray together. Today, it's impossible for Christians not to be overwhelmed by the emotion of being in a place that has been sacred since the dawning of their religion. For many tourists, the main attraction is the passage dug from the rock and used, according to tradition, to lead the faithful to safety in times of danger through a maze of inaccessible, overhanging caves. The cave church of St. Peter is still used. Pilgrims come here now and then to attend the solemn rites, unchanged by time, celebrated on special days, like the visit of the Patriarch to Antioch at the beginning of the 3rd millennium. For the most part, these pilgrims come from abroad, insofar as the local Christian community is now, unfortunately, almost non-existent. While the new religion was burgeoning in Antioch, another of the 12 apostles, Thomas the Doubter, set off across the ocean heading for India. After a long and hazardous voyage, he finally set foot on the subcontinent's southernmost shores. And so, thanks to Thomas the Apostle, the Church of Christ gained a foothold in that remote area, and with the church came the Aramaic language. In the place where tradition has it that the apostle first encountered the native people, some rabbis who came out to greet him, the scene is reconstructed with life-size models. Nearby are the remains of an ancient Hindu temple, transformed into a Christian church after the conversion of the local people to the gospel announced by Thomas. Centuries later, following in the Apostles' steps, Christianity spread to the center of southern India and Asia along the Silk Route. More often than not, this expansion was accompanied by the spread of the Syriac language. A long Chinese Syriac inscription on a stele erected in Xi'an, in ancient times known as Xinyanfu in western China, bears witness to the arrival in 635 AD of a Syriac mission there. Additional evidence comes from a Syriac manuscript of the Gospel written with golden letters for a Mongol princess at the end of the 13th century that contains a portrait of the princess herself with her husband. Our quest to retrace the history of the Arameans takes us back to the biblical city of Haran in Upper Mesopotamia, one of the oldest centers of habitation in the world and the cradle of the Aramean population, the land of Abraham.
And Terah took Abraham his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan. And they came unto Haran and dwelt there.
This is Haran today. The current inhabitants are unaware of their Aramean ancestry and barely remember the name of their biblical ancestor, even though he is rapidly becoming the town's main tourist attraction. Not far from Haran is Urfa, or Shanli Urfa, glorious Urfa as it is known today, a large city lost in the middle of nowhere, 50 kilometers from the Syrian border. Originally, it was known as Edessa, and it is steeped in history. Subject to the mysterious laws of military alchemy, great empires fought each other for centuries in this hot, dusty location that continued to be a theater of dispute between leading historical figures almost until the present day. The people who live here now are anything but aggressive. In the cool, relaxing park, pious Muslims gather to throw chickpeas to sacred carp. The fish are sacred because legend has it that at the funeral of the patriarch Abraham, who was a great prophet for the Muslims, the sparks from his pyre turned into carp when they hit the water. The entrance to the so-called Cave of Abraham is always crowded with pilgrims. According to a local legend that contradicts biblical history, this is the birthplace of the prophet Abraham, friend of God. Shanli Urfa is a melting pot of races and ancestries, Turks, Arabs, Kurds, and foreigners. The souk is emblematic of the ethnic mix. A cacophony of voices speaking in many different languages, but one is missing: Syriac, the Aramaic of the Syriac Christians who lived here for centuries. Two columns known as the Throne of Nimrod, the biblical founder of Edessa, stand out against the sky on the Kale, or fortress. On one of the columns, one can still see an inscription in Syriac recording the name of Queen Shalmat, who was a member of the local royal dynasty which established itself in Edessa in the late 2nd century BC, and whose line of kings lasted until the early 3rd century AD. It is said that Abgar VIII, known as the Great, converted to Christianity in the year 206 with the majority of his subjects, and thus the city became the world's first Christian kingdom. This is more legend than history, but it is very likely that the new religion reached Edessa at an early date, making it one of the most important centers of early Aramaic-speaking Christianity. As a result, its local Aramaic dialect, Syriac, became the language both of the Syrian Orthodox Church and of the other Syriac churches of the Middle East. Today, however, there are no signs of a Christian presence. The Christian population here, as in many other cities and villages of Upper Mesopotamia, was forced to migrate, or more precisely, to flee from the hatred and persecutions that, in 1915, even took on the characteristics of genocide. The last Christian communities left in 1924, spurred on by the massacres, and took with them all they were able to save from the dismantling of their churches: furniture, relics, holy books. Everything was transferred to nearby Aleppo in Syria, where they were warmly welcomed and have been able to continue professing their faith in peace. That's why traces of the early Christian community of Edessa can be found in St. George's Church in Aleppo. In the atrium, a modern bas-relief depicts the Aramean king of Edessa, Abgar V, known as the Black, who reigned many years before Abgar the Great. The king is depicted gazing at a linen sheet bearing the image of Christ. Tradition has it that Abgar the Black admired Jesus' miracles and sent a messenger asking him to come and heal a terrible illness from which he was suffering. Jesus answered that as soon as he ascended to heaven, he would send the king one of his disciples. When the messenger returned, he showed the king the effigy of Christ that Jesus himself had miraculously impressed onto a linen sheet, and the king was healed. 3 keys are required to open the safe that contains the still intact holy books that belong to the Edessa community. Lay members of the church keep 2 of the keys, and the bishop keeps the 3rd. Among the precious manuscripts in the safe is the Chronicle of Michael the Syrian, Mor Mikoyel Rabo, dating from 1199 AD. Syriac became the literary language of all Christians of Aramean descent, both in the Eastern Empire and farther east in the Sassanid Empire. Syriac had its own translation of the Bible, the Peshitta, still used today. And in the course of centuries, Syriac has generated a vast amount of literature by many important authors. Saint Ephrem of Nisibin, in particular, is one of the greatest poets of the early church. It was he who coined the phrase, the hidden pearl, to describe the Christian message.
حد من يوم مرقونيثو شقلث آحي حزيت بهروزي بني ملكوثو يقني وطفصي دهوي رابوثو هوتلو معينو وشتي ثمينو روزا ودبرو في قدامي ملكوثو دشنايو المرقونيثو
صمتوه أحاي عال فساد إيد تباقي بوه إزيد دحزيه من حد قبو هوت لوه أفي من كول قابين بصوتيه دبرو دلو متدرخد كولوه نهروي ري قدامي ملكوتو دشمايو مرقونيتو
بخي شفيوتو حزيت الشفيو دلوم الدلح وابدا خيوتو روزو رابو فغرد موران ضم صالالو بلو فولوهو حزيت القشتو دلوم تفالخ ريح قدامي ملكوتو دشمايو المرقونيتو.
These Aleppo school children are reciting one of St. Ephrem's poems. It is as though their voices have crossed the border into Turkey, traveling to their ancestral home of Nisibin in search of the memory of Mor Ephrem the Syrian. Mor in Aramaic means Lord, Monsignor, or Saint. Until a short time ago, here in Nisibin, known today as Nusaybin, an inscription was to be found on the walls of this church, recording the date 359 AD, which means that Saint Ephrem himself might have seen it being built, since he was still living in Nisibin at the time. We searched for the inscription in vain in the church dedicated to Saint Jacob of Nisibin, another great Syriac saint that welcomed us in the empty silence of its splendid desolation. In Aleppo's new cathedral, one of the countless Syrian Orthodox churches dedicated to Saint Ephrem, the remarkable modern frescoes are influenced by the rich Syriac culture, whose greatest figures were Bardaisan, known as the Aramean philosopher, who died in 222 AD, the poets Balai, Narsai, and Jacob of Seruj, along with authors such as John the Solitary, Philoxenus of Mabuch, Sergius of Reshina, and John of Ephesus, all belonging to the 5th and 6th centuries, followed in the 7th century by such men as Severus Sabocht, Jacob of Edessa, and Isaac of Nineveh, or Isaac the Syrian. These were followed in later centuries by great scholars such as Mushe bar Kifo, Dionysius bar Salibi, the patriarch Michael the Great, and culminating in the polymath Gregorius bar Ebroio in the 13th century. Included among these illustrious figures, naturally, is Saint Ephrem. Late antiquity, especially from the 3rd to the 5th centuries, was a period of hermits, ascetics, and monks. The remote, often inaccessible places that these mad followers of God inhabited seem impossibly inhospitable to us in the 21st century. These men cut themselves off intentionally from the rest of the world, and the only way to find traces of them is by following goat tracks. This is Wadi Kadisha, the Lebanese Holy Valley, where there are many remains of Syriac monasteries and hermit dwellings that blossomed during that age of great mystical fervor. However, these men, who were commonly referred to as the recluses, did not embrace a life of extreme sacrifice out of an abstract love of God, an elitist need for isolation, or an egotistical life of contemplation. In 313 AD, the Edict of Constantine sanctioned the end of the persecutions and marked the beginning of freedom of worship for Christians. Being a Christian was no longer synonymous with imprisonment, torture, and death. But many members of the Church yearned to belong to the world of martyrdom of the early Christians. They yearned to be martyrs themselves, determined to sacrifice their lives in order to bear witness of their faith. This is why they made their heroic choice and subjected themselves to what was widely considered absurd hardship and deprivation. A hermit monk wishing to found a monastery would choose a cave big enough to contain a church. The presence of a freshwater spring nearby was indispensable. For several years, such a monk would live alone in the cave, praying and awaiting the arrival of fellow monks who would join him of their own free will, together with others who responded to his invitation. When the group was big enough, everyone worked together to build the church. Subsequently, the monastery would be built. Each monk was assigned his own cave, some accessible only by rope or ladder, in which he lived a life of prayer and solitude until the end of his days. Every Sunday, the monks gathered in the monastery to take the Eucharist, to receive orders from their superior, and to collect a ration of bread, water, and oil. Each monk might also have had a goat to provide milk and cheese. When they were old or ill, monks too weak to reach the monastery would be assigned younger monks who would see to their needs and nurse them until their final hour. Ikos Ayas, once a Syriac monastery, is still inhabited today. It contains a typical example of a cave church. The cave seems to offer a protective embrace and, in some places, is incorporated into the building itself. A few other active monasteries can still be found in this part of northern Lebanon, known as the Mountain of the Primitive City, and today called Wadi Kadisha, or the Sacred Valley. There are three dioceses of the Syrian Orthodox Church in Lebanon: the Diocese of Beirut, the Diocese of Mount Lebanon, and the Diocese of Zakhle. Together with believers from different countries, the faithful who live here often visit the Holy Valley, following in the footsteps of the countless pilgrims who have passed through here over the centuries on their way to the Holy Land. One of the most popular destinations is still the monastery of Ikos Ayas and its original place of worship dedicated to Saint Anthony, who was considered a specialist in healing mental illnesses. Curiosity brings many tourists here to see where the mentally ill were healed long ago, and the high caves where the most dangerous cases were held in chains. But most visitors come here to express their faith. Entire families will light a votive candle and pray together, to give thanks for answered prayers or to ask for grace, to pray for the health of a family member or for the success of a project. Barren women pray for children, and unmarried women pray for a husband. Examples of simple devotion that always demand respect. From Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, it's not difficult to reach Ferzol Mountain, with its rock face punctuated by 6 levels of pre-Christian cave tombs that were taken over centuries later by Syriac monks and transformed into dwellings. Evidence of a pagan past is everywhere, in symbols of Phoenician divinities, and in cells where bloody sacrifices were offered. Visitors can almost identify with the spirits of those who, for love of Christ, chose to live as recluses in these tombs. Dominating the upper reaches of the Orontes River in the Bekaa Valley is the Cave of the Monk. Originally a monastery, this group of caves was used by crusaders as a fortified lookout point. The vaulted ceiling is darkened a smoky black by torches and fires kept constantly alight to protect the cave's inhabitants from the merciless cold of the long Lebanese winter. Those who make the climb up here are rewarded by the simple signs of devotion that refer not to the Crusades, but rather to men whose eyes looked heavenward, men who chose to live in these austere caves during their earthly lives. Below are the springs that give life to the Orontes River. In Aramaic, the Orontes is called Alazi, the Rebel River, because an optical illusion often gives the curious impression that it flows uphill. The river flows in a wide arc through 3 countries, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey. Ever since ancient times, it's been harnessed to power water wheels and still serves irrigation canals that turn arid, unfertile land into rich soil. The Orontes River divides in two Antioch, the city of the evangelist Luke and of the first Christians, and after a total course of some 390 kilometers, it empties itself into the Mediterranean. The waters of the Orontes symbolize the vital lifeline that runs from closed monasteries, hermit dwellings, and holy springs through tortuous, mysterious canals to reach the entire community of believers.